What's good, everybody? Today we are just gonna do a simple bike check. Why am I doing a bike check? Well, to be honest with you, never thought something like this would be of any interest to anybody, but recently I've been watching all the videos coming out from Source BMX with Van Homan going over all the pros bikes, and to be honest, if you're anything like me, if you're from the mid school, you're probably gonna find a lot of those videos boring. I mean, a lot of these modern riders, they just don't seem to care what the geometry is. They just don't seem to really even know what some of the parts on their own bikes are. So for me, a BMX nerd and someone that actually took the time to have a custom frame built, let's get into some BMX nerdery here. So this is my personal ride, of course. This is what I call my daily, right? Unfortunately, injuries are keeping me sidelined right now, so I'm not sure when I'm gonna really be able to get back on the bike and use it to its full capability. But in the meantime, I can sure admire it, and hopefully you do too. So let's start with the frame, the backbone of the BMX bike. So this frame is a pedal-driven slab. It's a custom slab. Pedal driven, if you aren't familiar, is a small handmade US brand. It is owned by a gentleman by the name of Spooky Dave Harrison. Spooky Dave, I think he got that moniker when he was working for Spooky Cycles. The dude has a long history in BMX. I mean, he's built for basically every brand we ever coveted as a mid-school rider. Metal bikes, Terrible One, I think he built stuff for Kink. Basically, oh, and then of course he had a long run with FBM bikes as well. So the guy definitely knows what he's doing when it comes to building frames, and his builds are top notch. Now, this bike, this frame I had made for me in 2019. And to be honest with you, I'm not really sure at what capacity Spooky Dave is still building custom BMX bikes. But if you're in the market for a custom BMX bike and you want something quality and US built, reach out to Pedal Driven Cycles. I'll try and drop some contact and link below. Anyways, let's get on with it. Sorry about the rambling, but you know how I do. So Spooky Dave had a frame called the Slab. That was his city street bike. This is kind of an iteration of that bike, but with my own custom geometry and custom touches. So let's start with the geometry on this bad boy. We got a 20 3/4 top tube. Head tube angle on this bad boy is 74 degrees. By modern standard, it is super raked out, it's super chopper, it's super mellow, and whatever you'd want to call it. But by my standards, that's just like standard fare, typical feel-good BMX, right? I don't do nose manuals and all that type of stuff. The last thing I want to do is lose the front end when carving. So I like a mellow head tube. Seat tube, 71 degrees, pretty standard, right? If I was to shoot this, if I was to build another custom frame, I might go with something a little more laid back. I don't know if you guys remember the Hoffman Condor. That bike had a 68 degree seat tube angle. And even though that top tube was, I think, like 20 3/4 or something like that, the overall wheelbase was really short because of that kicked back seat tube on it, but it gave a big cockpit for the rider. So I like that laid back seat post look of that bike. Bottom bracket height, 11.5. I couldn't see myself ever running anything higher than 11.5. That is just like the sweet spot for everything. Once again, going back to the Condor, that bike at one point had, I think, 11 3/8 or something like that. It was a really low bottom bracket. And the idea is it lowers your center of gravity, and in ramps you can get a better pump, and it's just more stable. And it's true, man. The low bottom brackets really help stabilize and put you in an ergonomic position that's just really nice. In fact, what I kind of find odd is how many riders run frames with a tall bottom bracket, and then they run these super tall bars and high stems and things like that, and all you're doing is just lifting up your overall body position. Keep a low bottom bracket, man, it makes sense. Now on the rear end, 13 3/4 center to center. Right now with this 3011 gearing that I'm running, it's a little bit under. You can run this thing slam to like 13.5 and then stretched out to around 14 inches. But this is where the customization comes in to the frame. So that's the geometry. I think that's pretty, you know, basically trails racer inspired from the mid 90s, but in a street frame. I think it's just like the best combination of all worlds. But in making a rear end like this, I wanted to do some things that kind of I hadn't seen on other frames before. And so this is kind of really cool. So the Slab frame comes with clearance for a 2.4 tire, right? The modern fatty street tire that everybody runs. And I wanted to have that kind of clearance because on my last pedal driven frame, the cool thing, which is a trail frame, I only really had clearance for like a 2.1. The thing is though, as you go to a wider chainstay to accommodate those larger tires and you shorten the rear end to allow for a shorter rear end, you start losing clearances around the chain ring, around the brakes, and things like that. Now there was a few things I really wanted. I wanted my brakes mounted on the chainstay. To be honest, I honestly don't run brakes that often anyways, but I did want that as an option on this bike, especially because I wanted a one size fits all, do all, jack of all trades BMX bike that could go to the trails, the pump track, and tear it up on the streets, park, whatever. And we definitely achieved that. So this bike has clearance for a 32 chainring, which allows the clearance for the chainstay mounted brakes, and it also has enough chain clearance or a chainstay clearance for a 2.4 tire, which after running 2.4s, I don't see the appeal, man. In fact, they're so fat, you really got to lean that bike over to kind of get it to turn and carve. A narrower tire, I understand why racers run that narrow in the back, fatter in the front setup. They just tracks so much better through corners and things like that. So the other thing that I did on this bike, and I'm surprised no other manufacturer has done this. So with the invention of removable brake bosses, manufacturers now have the ability to put multiple brake mounting locations on the bike. And so what I did here is we actually put two sets of brake bosses right next to each other, so that as you move that wheel in the dropout, depending on if you want to run a shorter rear end or a longer rear end, you can actually move your brakes, the entire brake assembly with the wheel. And the reason I did that is to keep the pad adjustment as close to the pivot point as possible, because the further away that you have that pad mounted from that pivot point, the weaker the brake becomes. So obviously, you know, if you've ever cut something with some wire cutters, you want to cut it right there at the hinge. That's where you're going to get the most fulcrum, the most force, and the same thing applies to brakes. And another cool side effect of running your brakes as close as you can to the pivot point is it really minimizes the amount of squeak that comes off these brakes. And you can see I'm running chrome rims, and these are just like a standard U-brake brake pad. They're like probably some $10 you know, cheapies, but they grip and they stop incredibly well, and I don't have any brake squeak. So I've always searched in forums, like, how do you get rid of brake squeak, right? And people are like, oh, different pad compounds, and clean your rims with the simple green, or use all rubbing alcohol, and blah, blah, blah. Everybody has their, like, kind of, you know, tricks to making the brake stop squeaking. Well, let me tell you what I have found is the culprit behind brake squeaking. That's brake chatter. And that comes from the brake itself actually on the brake post moving as it grips. So we don't see it because it happens so fast, but basically that brake is gripping and skipping, and it's causing the entire pad to chatter against the surface of the rim, and that's what creates that horrendous squealing, squeaking sound. So the more you can minimize how much flex or how much movement happens in the brake arm as the pad grips the rim, you're gonna minimize the brake squeak. And there's two methods to doing that. One, run the pad as close as you can to the brake surface. Also, I like running the pad as far up towards the top edge of the rim. The other thing too is the brake posts themselves. I noticed I never really had issues with brake squeak and chatter and stuff like that on my old school, mid-school frames, and that's because those brake posts were welded onto the frame, so they didn't flex. They didn't go anywhere. But these brake bosses that are removable, they always, no matter how tight you got them tightened down, they're gonna have a little bit of movement. But if you're adamant about not having squealy brakes, one, run welded on brake lugs, brake posts, preferably lower and shorter to the frame, and then two, run those brake pads as close to the pivot point as possible, and you'll be surprised, you might not get any squeak out of your chrome rims anymore. Okay, enough talking about that, but it was a big deal, man, because this is the first and only frame I've ever seen that has multiple brake mounting locations. In fact, I encourage anybody in the bike industry, Ronnie over at Sparky's, Moeller, whoever's out there, you know, Odyssey, Sunday, take that idea and run with it. In fact, I was thinking what would be really cool is you could have a brake mount location to set up your wheel at a longer rear end on the chainstay. That way, if you run a bigger sprocket and you're running a trail setup, you can run your brakes on the chainstay, and then maybe you can put a lug up on the seat stay for a wheel that's being run closer and get a little bit more clearance around a fat tire. So yeah, this frame came out remarkably well. Like, the tolerances are very tight, but with this setup, I can run a 2.4 in the back and clear the brakes while on the chainstay, well, with a 30-11 gearing. So pretty versatile, pretty cool. Everything else is pretty standard fare. You know, 1/4 inch heat treated dropouts, 14 mil. We have straight gauge tubing throughout everything. I don't like the look of the tapered tubing that everybody uses now. I get it, it's lighter weight and all that type of stuff. It just reminds me of skinny jeans, man. And that goes same as the fork. I like a fork with a straight leg. I don't like the tapered leg. Now, the problem with running straight legs on a fork is you run out of clearance for your pegs. Luckily, Shadow makes the awesomest peg of all time, the little one's peg. And the way they're beveled at the edges, they clear the welds of the dropouts, and I can actually run these Shadow little ones on this S&M ditch fork. I think that's pretty much sums up the frame. Of course, I got a traditional seat post clamp. I like the integrated look, but man, it just gives you so many more options to run, you know, cool looking parts on your bike. I got this nice little Originate that's kind of milled out with the chrome and the black. As you can see, that's an ongoing theme in all my stuff, black and chrome. I think there's just nothing more classic than that. You know, pedal driven typically does like these custom badges on the down tubes, the head tube. I opted for no badging on this bike. Not sure if it reads like it, but this bike is heavily influenced by the S&M dirt bike, a bike that I had always wanted, but for some reason just always eluded me. And the entire black and chrome theme of this bike is something that was heavily influenced by Brian Castillo, one of my favorite riders growing up. Every time I saw him in a magazine or on a video, he was on those black and chrome setups, and it just looked so cool. The other couple custom touches is we did an 1 3/8" diameter top tube, which little fatter than most, and an 1.5" diameter down tube, little fatter than most. Once again, kind of a throwback, an homage, if you will, to the mid-school era. We got double gusseting up front, and pedal driven does a cool little TCB, little taking care of business Elvis, you know, tribute there, cut out on the head tube badge. Integrated headset, of course, gyro tabs, and all the other good stuff, mid bottom bracket. And yeah, my favorite frame of all time. And I think it's ironic that as I built my dream bike, kind of began the era of me being too injured to really ride my bike as much as I wanted to. So now I'm that old man that has a really cool bike and doesn't do anything but, you know, cruise it around the neighborhood. But hey man, as long as we're out there pedaling, I guess we're still BMXers. All right, let's get on to the fork, right? So I mentioned S&M ditch fork. Part for part on this bike is pretty much all my favorite stuff. And this fork is a fork that is, I think, gonna be a collector's fork in short time due to the fact that this is a heat-treated ditch fork with the nice chrome. Apparently with modern chroming standards, you can't really get this type of chrome on heat-treated chromoly anymore. So I'm definitely gonna take care of these and hold on to them, and super stoked to have them. These, like I said, are the fork that does not have a tapered fork leg. and so it makes the clearance a little smaller at the dropout, but it does have a 33 millimeter offset on the dropout. So paired that with that low bottom bracket and the long rear end and the mallow head tube, this thing is just super stable, super Cadillac, and super chill. This is, I've never named this bike, which maybe is why it hasn't treated me the best. I've taken a lot of crashes on this bike. But yeah, I might call this thing the Easy Rider, you know, because this thing's choppered out. Now, also on the front end, we have the Odyssey TL48 stem. Best stem Odyssey ever made. Odyssey, please bring back the TL48. It's clean looking, it's a 48 millimeter reach. Anything longer than 50 actually gets a little bit weird because it kind of throws your bars. You know, they kind of sway rather than pivot. I drilled out the bolt holes to clearance them a little bit more, so those bolts drop right in real nice. It's got the nice little flush mounted cap here that just from S&M just happened to pair perfectly with this Odyssey stem. Odyssey bearings on the headset, and the bars. So I'm a lifelong fan of the 4-piece bar. There's just nothing more freestyle. And once again, that kind of goes back to the Brian Castillo era. You know, I used to ride Castillo bars, and then just over time, as my back got more thrashed, the bars got bigger, but I always stayed with the 4-piece. The cool thing with the 4-piece bar is it has like a really narrow box to it, so you can get these things cut down and still have enough room for brake levers and grips and the whole thing. The bar I typically would run is the Bone Death Deadman bar. I have a set of those. I'm never getting rid of them. And I think that was just like the perfect bar for me. And I was super bummed when they discontinued them. But the tallest they ever offered, the original, or the V2 Deadman, was 9 inches. And this bike is the old man bike. You had to get it taller up in the front end. So I got that big riser stem on it, got the spacers under here. This bar was hard to find, but I found it at a local bike shop. This is the Haro Nyquist bar. So it's basically a jackhammer theme bar, but larger. But the one thing I noticed that was super rad about these is when I put them next to the Bone Death Deadman bars, they were virtually identical. They looked like they came out of the same factory. Like it had the same kind of stamping to indicate what the rise was and things like that. And I imagine they did come out of the same factory. The sweep is the same, the uprise is the same, the crossbar has the same type of bend on it. The chrome's a little nicer on the Deadman, but I think that's just because it came out of a little bit older era. These are butted, and they also flare to 1 inch, and they got that cool little pierced situation down here. All the edges are capped, which is really nice. So these bars are just crazy cool. I'm super stoked they built these. Haro discontinued those. So once again, the frame, one off. The fork, no longer in production. The bars, no longer in production. So everything, the stem, no longer in production. So thank God I got my hands on all these cool parts when I was able to. Staying with the front end over here. So we'll go down to the wheel. In fact, we'll just talk about both wheels. Odyssey Hazard Lite rims in chrome. Can't go wrong with a Hazard Lite. Super strong. I mean, I actually have a second set of these just in case the chrome gets thrashed on these, but I think I still got in when the chrome was nice and durable. So these have had no issues of flaking, peeling, gouging, even though I got little like nicks and stuff on it from banging up against other bikes. They have held really strong. Hubs, front end, we're running Minis. Yeah, you say profile, right? Long time staple in BMX, can't go wrong with profile. The Minis are awesome, and one of the only hubs that I could get optioned with a 1-piece 11-tooth driver and also in polished. So had to go with the Minis, had to keep it American made. So we got the American made fork, frame, and hubs on this bike. Now the spokes, if you're ever building a custom wheel set, I highly recommend these spokes. They're made by a company called Sapum. They're called the Strong Spoke, and they're butted. It's a, what is it, a 14 gauge spoke, and then at the J bend, it goes to a 13 gauge spoke. Ever since I built these wheels, tensioned them up nice and tight, there has been zero issues with them coming out of true or spokes loosening up. So bulletproof wheel set for sure. So we covered the front end pretty well. Grips, grip ever made, the Animal Edwin. Animal never stopped making the Edwin grip. Down here at the cranks, Odyssey Thunderbolt cranks in the good chrome. Don't think we'll ever see good chrome on the Thunderbolt because it's a heat treated chromoly. So like I was saying, they really can't do that type of chroming anymore because of you know, regulations. So these things have been super durable as far as the chrome finish on it, and they're as good as advertised, man. Single bolt, tighten it down, never have any issues. I'm generally a big fan of the profile cranks, and in my next build I'm going back to profiles just because they have that classic look. But just as far as something that's blingy and something that's just dead reliable, Odyssey Thunderbolts. Pedals, once again, like the Animal Edwin grip, these pedals, I think once you go to these, you're not going to find anything you like more. And these are the Odyssey Twisted pedals. These aren't the Twisted Pros, which are a larger platform with less pins. These are the original Twisted. I went to the Pro pedal for a while. It just never felt right. As soon as I went back to these, it's like as soon as my feet lands on them, they just seem to find the sweet spot every time. So yeah, Odyssey Twisteds for life, man. Let's go down to the brakes here, since that's kind of what I'm looking at. These are the Shadow Conspiracy. It's a CNC brake, not sure what the model is. Also running a Shadow lever. I just love how clean they look, and of course they're raw or polished aluminum, so just set it off right with the bike. I like the machined arm. If I can get a machine part like the stem, the brakes, things like that, I just think it looks a lot better than the cast aluminum stuff. So gearing on this thing, like I said, 30-11. Pretty standard as far as the gear ratio goes. It's you know, close to that traditional 44-16 or 36-13. It's all in line with that as far as the ratio, and it's the biggest sprocket I could clear on this frame, and it gives enough clearance for the chain, for the brakes. And this is the Odyssey Fang sprocket. Once again, another product that I don't think they make, and I think it is the raddest looking sprocket. The chain, once again, got to go with the best chain ever made. This is the Shadow Conspiracy. You know what it is. It's the half link, but the Supreme version. Once you go Supreme, you don't go back. Tires. Tires was a biggie, man. Believe it or not, my entire life riding BMX bikes, I really didn't care what kind of tire I had as long as they looked cool. Of course, ran all the staple cool Primo tires back in the day, the V Monster, the Wall, the Dirt Monster. Then I got into the Animal tires. I was running the GHL or GLH tires. Then started running the MMT. I don't know if you guys remember those. Such a cool Mad Max monster truck looking thing. But never did it really matter what tires I rode. Like, it just really didn't seem to affect my riding until I started dealing with back and neck issues, and every little bump and impact I started really feeling in my joints, or you know, in my neck and head. And so of course my immediate idea was, well, I'm gonna step up to the big fat 2.4 tires, and I'm gonna air them down and run them real soft, and that's gonna give me all the absorption of impact that I need. And at the time I was running some Odyssey Path Pro tires, which an amazing tire, great tire. I love it. It had the folding bead, the K-Lite version, but it seemed like no matter how low I brought the pressure on those tires, it just still seemed to really jar me when I landed. And at that point I figured, man, I'm just not gonna be able to ride a BMX bike anymore. Well, working in a bike shop for a long time, you kind of get familiar with different terms. And one of the terms that gained popularity in the last few years is this term supple, right? And it was generally used in regards to the ride quality of a tire in the gravel bike category. And unfortunately for BMX, it's all usually about cost and strength, right? They know BMXers don't have a lot of cash, and they know BMXers are gonna beat stuff up. So it's like, how can we make the cheapest thing the most durable? But in doing so, a lot of times you lose the ability to really engineer like ride quality into the part or the component. And I've noticed that with BMX tires. There's not really a lot of BMX tires that have put a focus on supple factor, or you know, the ride quality of the tire. So I experimented with a bunch of different tires, and of course I found my way to the Maxxis Grifter tire. This is basically the tire all the top street pros run. I would say street, like park riders run, you know. But dude, I put these tires on and immediately felt a difference, right? I could actually tell this tire was engineered to some degree to actually have a good ride quality. They're grippy as all hell. These things run just super true, super smooth, super balanced, but the supple factor, man, it's there. And so if you're an older BMX rider, or you just want something that's gonna absorb the small bumps and vibrations better, go check out the Maxxis Grifter tires, man. I can't say enough good things about these. I doubt I'll ever run another tire for street. And as far as diameters go, I'm running a 2.125 in the back. Once again, built this bike to run a 2.4 because I thought I needed that fat tire for the cushion. Turns out there's really no advantage to running that big fat tire, especially in the rear. It just doesn't allow the bike to track a turn the same way. So diameter up front is a 2.3. I had a 2.4, don't need that much diameter. Now, if you get into the physics of how bikes turn, there's really cool videos that pertain to motorcycle geometry about rake and trail. And it explains a lot of how the front end is set up. But also there's some cool videos, I think Revzilla did one, regarding how a bike turns, a motorcycle. And it applies the same way to a bicycle, of course. The fatter your tire is, the further over you need to lean that wheel to get to that inner edge to get a turn, you know, started, established, or deeper into a tighter turn. So the narrower you run a tire, the less you're gonna have to lean your bike over to get that bike to carve or turn. And I really noticed that. So I went to the 2.1 in the back, the little skinny guy. I went to the 2.3 up front, and dude, this bike is just like, it's superb, man. It just runs so perfect. It's almost like you just think it, and that's where the bike goes, just effortlessly, whether you're rolling forward or backwards. So high praise to the tires. All right, so we went over the pegs, we went over the hubs. The hubs do have integrated grind guards, but they are aluminum. Not a big fan of that because they don't grind real fast. I think it'd be cool if Profile offered a steel version of their hub guards for these mini hubs. We got just an Originate seat post. You know, kind of a Thompson post knockoff. I was running the pivotal post for quite a while, and yeah, you know, you can kind of get the seat where you want it, but you can't get the fore and aft position of the seat, and that would really bother me because I'm still from the era where we pinch our seats to do bar spins, and I could not get my pivotal post set up where I wasn't just thrashing the inside of my leg. So I found me an old couch, right? This is the old Mira saddle that was rebranded as just the Haro saddle, but the smaller version. Super comfy saddle, railed, and we got this on this post, so I got it right where I need it. So when I lean back to pinch the seat to do a bar spin, my knees grab right there where it's nice and padded, and I don't tear up my knees anymore. So I think a lot of manufacturers should probably start looking at bringing back a little bit more comfy seat, a little bit more padding for the knees, railed seat. But then, hey, I see what these kids are doing with little seats that I would never ride, and I can't be one to talk, man. Well, I think that pretty much covers every little nook and cranny of this bike. I hope you enjoyed this bike breakdown, and hopefully you're able to zone out for a little bit, man. So get back to work. I'll do the same, and till next time, take it easy, man. Peace out.